The following is a conversation with Eric Williams. Eric Williams is a graduate of Columbia Law School and has spent time practicing big law in big cities such as New York. However, he currently resides in Detroit and spends his time advocating for the Detroit community and operating his own personal firm specializing in intellectual property and trademark law. Tune in to hear more about his story. So, Eric, working as an attorney, I feel like I'm obligated to ask this question. Is your favorite TV show Suits?
I've never seen it.
Mhm.
I just don't. I don't like procedural shows. I don't like shows about attorneys. So no, I've never actually seen it. I feel kind of guilty at this point, but no, I've never seen it.
It's a fair answer. Actually, I watched the series a few weeks ago, a few years ago, seemingly before it was on Netflix and before it was cool. So, definitely a great show, but I could see why you wouldn't like it. It's really dramatized and a lot of crazy stuff, and maybe a little more familiar with kind of New York law 15, 20 years ago, as opposed to kind of the more modern approach. So, no worries on that. But on that note, did you always know that you wanted to become an attorney, or you were always exploring a few other career paths when you were younger?
Um, to be honest, I didn't want to be an attorney. So I mean, it just kind of, I don't want to say it just happened, but I always wanted to be either, uh, this is kind of embarrassing. I always wanted to be either a writer or a policeman,
Hmm.
which seems odd given the kind of sort of social justice work that I do. But yeah, my father was a police officer, and so I wanted to do that. And then I got to undergrad and grad school, and people were saying, you ought to be a lawyer. I didn't really, I didn't really know, and I put it off for years. Like I went to college and went to grad school, and then I actually had a career working in the nonprofit sector, uh, doing grant writing. And around that time, my father retired from the police department because he lost his right arm to cancer from Agent Orange exposure when he was in Vietnam. And so right around the time, right around that time, he'd gone to law school and he'd become a lawyer. And so I was like, okay, that's interesting. And I was living in New York, and yeah, so I went to law school. I was like, this whole nonprofit thing isn't feeding my wife and three kids, so
Mhm.
that was basically why I went. And once I got there, I was like, oh, this is cool. I like this.
Got it. No worries. Sorry to hear about what happened to your father. But I feel like regarding your other career choices, I feel as though it's a really natural transition. Not becoming a police officer or writer, but I feel like a lot of the aspects of that are involved in being a lawyer. For example, you're trying to kind of, I don't want to say argue the law in certain cases or argue certain interpretations, and you're probably doing a lot of writing too. So I could see how that would be just a natural path for you for sure.
In retrospect, yeah, it seems a lot more, logical and a clear path than it seemed at the time. But when you're in it, you can never see it. But I think you're right. A lot of the same things come into play.
So when you
So.
said that when you were in New York and you kind of saw that the nonprofit stuff wasn't working and you started exploring law, and then you said, "Oh, this stuff is really cool. I really like it." What really stuck out to you about being a lawyer or possibly pursuing something in the legal profession?
So initially, when I went to law school, my intention was to I wanted to become a public defender,
Hmm.
right? So uh, seeing I was in New York during Giuliani's time as mayor,
Hmm.
and as a black man in New York around that time, you felt a little bit,
Hmm.
uh, you didn't feel exactly welcome.
Yep.
And seeing some of the things that were happening, I felt like, okay, this would be a wonderful place for me to be able to improve. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, at the time, the Kings County Public Defender's Office had a hiring freeze. They didn't have any money, which made my wife at the time very happy because they were only paying like 40 grand a year, which is like a third of what I would offers I had coming out to join big private, big firms in New York. One of my friends, actually, her name is Vanessa Potkin. She works for the Innocence Project in New York. Uh, has We came out the same time, similar aspirations, And she has had a remarkable career. I mean, anytime you can look back and say, I've helped a dozen people, a dozen innocent people walk off death row. I mean, you really can't ask
Incredible.
for much more in a career. And so I ended up, unfortunately, working at large law firms. Yeah, I did not like that. One, I mean, it paid well, but I absolutely hated that.
Mhm.
And yeah, so it took me, probably a decade or so to find out what I really wanted to do
Mhm.
with my law degree.
And I think that's
Yeah.
fair. I think a lot of times people don't know exactly what their passions are, or they find their passion, but they don't know the best way to apply that passion. So I think everyone has a unique journey, and definitely interesting to hear from your perspective. But I know you could probably say a lot of things to this regarding why you didn't like big law, and there's probably maybe lawyers listening to this in big law right now, kind of silently agreeing with you. But what would you say were the biggest things that you didn't enjoy working for these big law firms, probably in New York?
Yeah, so I mean, you're right. I could go on for hours about that. Part of it was I didn't like the clients that we were representing.
Hmm.
Right? We were representing companies that had done real harm to individuals and communities.
Hmm.
And so that's problematic in and of itself. And leaving that aside, the way big law operates, you bill every minute. You're responsible for every minute of every day, which is a little, not only it's annoying, makes sort of it makes the way you practice very different than if you were practicing with a more sort of holistic approach to what you were doing.
Hmm.
And then finally, the story. I was working at a firm
Hmm.
in New York. We'd been there. I'd been at work for probably, I don't know, more than 36 hours,
Hmm.
right? And I was working with a friend of mine. Our offices were right next to each other, and the showers in the office were. And this is one of the bigger law firms in the country. So the showers in the office weren't working, and so he lived Upper East Side, and the firm I was working at is right above Grand Central in New
Gotcha.
York.
Hmm.
And he asked, could he go home? The partner said, a little short woman, said, well, if you can get there and back. And he said, well, I live Upper East Side. I can't be back in half an hour, but I can be back in an hour. And she goes, no, that's too long. Now, my friend, he'd played college football, like D1 football.
Hmm.
He was a big guy, and the partner was a very little woman. And uh, when he said no, he's like, you're not going to let me shower? And she literally poked him in the chest and said, I own you. And he just stood there and looked at her. And then we walked back into his office, and he's sitting there perplexed. Good Jewish dude, right? From Long Island. He looked at me and he said, she doesn't owe me. Moses freed us. And I just cracked up.
That's funny.
3 weeks later, he got a job down in Miami where he still practices. He's like, enough of that. So, yeah, I'm sorry. I just think, I mean, she was just a little short Italian woman.
Hmm.
I own you.
It's like,
So, yeah, so
wasn't
it wasn't fulfilling. Let's put it like that.
Yep. No, I definitely feel that. And I think, after what happened, it's a really natural transition to go from New York to Miami. I'm sure the weather's much better there. And
Oh,
just
yeah, he
naturally
loves it.
better. No, I get it. I mean, he's right. Look, so I happen to be Jewish too, and Moses did free us. So hopefully, no small Italian woman
There you
or
go.
any kind will be like, no one owns anyone. We're all here to try to add value as the best we can.
That's the theory, though these days, it's hard to be sure.
Yeah, crazy world we live in. But similar on
Hmm.
that note, one of the things or the main area that you practice is trademark and IP. Is there a reason you chose
Hmm.
that area of practice as opposed to kind of litigation or other types of law?
So, yeah, so I did do some litigation. I actually did some bankruptcy as well. Uh, One of the interesting things about being a lawyer is you learn by practicing,
Hmm.
right? I mean, all they teach you really in law school, and I say this as a former law professor, all we teach you in law school is basically how to look stuff up, how to write it out, and how to relay it to the client. Really, that's kind of mostly what you learn.
Hmm.
So my I have a lot of friends who are performers. They're creatives, right? In fact, my sister's currently in Chicago, in the play Chicago on Broadway in New York, right? So if you ever get a chance, go see her. So lots of creatives around me, and they just needed help. They didn't understand sometimes what was going on, didn't they knew that they were being taken advantage of in some way, but they didn't really know how. So they called me up because they figured, you're a lawyer, you know what to do. And of course I did not at the time, but this was 20 years ago. I had no idea. I was like, oh, I took a copyright class. So you look it up and you sit there and you work with your friends, and I helped a few people, and then things worked out really well. And I realized I enjoyed it, not only the subject matter. All right. So and nowadays, for example, artificial intelligence is a fairly prominent feature of a lot of the work I do. But the part I liked about it, and it was the same part I would have liked about being a public defender, is someone coming to you with a problem. And they're like, this contract doesn't look right, or I wrote this and now somebody else is using it. And you look at the situation and then you go, hey, I got you, relax. And I mean, there's palpable relief. I mean, that's the coolest part about your job, about almost any job, right? Someone comes to you with a problem and you go, yo, I got you, relax, we will take care of this. And yeah, I just loved it. Plus you get to hang around with artists who are a lot more fun than accountants or law partners in general. So yeah, it was tons of fun.
Yeah, I imagine creatives and artists are definitely much funner clients, or much more fun clients than, for example, the big pharma companies or the big corporate giants of the world who are in their tidy suits. And not that there's anything wrong with suits, but when you're wearing the same one every day,
Yeah,
you hate what you wear.
right, exactly.
Yep, for sure.
And our meetings took place in places like bars or clubs after they performed, like in the back, and that was definitely more fun than our offices over on 42nd Street.
Yep, yeah, definitely more of a vibe I can imagine. But on that note, is there a lot of gray area with kind of how, say, actors or people more in the creative industry work? Because typically, at least early on in their careers, they probably work for companies. So is there any way to define kind of what's their work versus what's the company's work, or is that something that has to be kind of declared in an employment agreement? I don't know if I'm asking an exact question here, but there is kind of some gray area there, if you know what I'm saying, right?
Right. So you're actually very right. Typically, if you are employed by a company and you come up with something that's kind of in the course of your employment and it's something that relates to your job, the people who work for you, who people you work for, they basically own that intellectual property, right? The idea is, of course, they hired you for that, right? But that's not always the case. And particularly if you're an independent contractor, there have to be, it's one of those things you kind of need to negotiate at some point, right? Whether if I come up with something, do I own it or do you own it? I'm an employee. Is this part of my job? So there is a little gray area there. Typically, if there's an employment agreement, it will include a provision that says basically anything you come up with, we own, right? And but it may be that, and usually it has to do with whether or not you use their resources, you did it on their time, you use their computer, you use their bandwidth. They'll make the argument that you couldn't have done it without them, so they're entitled to own it, that kind of thing. Yeah, that is definitely something that comes up, and you need to think about it. You need to be aware of the fact that just because you come up with a really great idea or a really great process or whatever doesn't necessarily mean that you own it. And in fact, you might be precluded from using it for someone other than the people you were working for when you came up with it.
Got it. So on that note, what do you think are some of the more common mistakes that small businesses or kind of medium-sized businesses make when it comes to trademark or intellectual property law?
So number one is not recognizing its value. Uh, if you had a choice between the technology behind a Nike shoe or the rights to the Nike swoosh, which would you take?
The
Right?
right.
It's not even close.
Yeah.
Right? Just putting that swoosh. I mean, there's value inherent in that.
Hmm.
And one of the problems for companies, particularly companies that aren't necessarily, like for example, if you're not a software company or you're not a manufacturer, you may not think that some of the things you produce or some of the things you use have the kind of value that warrants protection. And that's not true. And it can be something, I mean, it can be, a copyright or a trademark, or it could be something that's particular to the way you do business. So it's worth protecting as a trade secret, right? It's proprietary. And there are things you need to do in order to effectively protect that. So number one is not recognizing the value and then not taking the steps to protect it. Number two is kind of what we were talking about in the other situation, but you're on the other side of it. And that is you have, during the course of your business, whether it's you or one of the people who works with you or for you, create something of value,
Hmm.
right? But you don't capture it because, again, you're not aware of the value. So someone who you've hired as an independent contractor, you don't, they're going to be doing something that is going to be very valuable to you.
Hmm.
You don't arrange so that they actually transfer whatever interest they have in it to your company, even though, in many respects, you might have been responsible for them creating it. Right. So that's probably the other big issue. Intellectual property is only valuable, if you can monetize it, right? And if you don't protect it, if you're not aware of the fact that you should be, holding it yourself or maybe even licensing it, you're leaving money on the table.
Hmm.
And then the last thing, of course, is violating someone else's, sort of
IP.
copyright or trademark, and you're infringing, and the next thing you know, you have, I don't know, you have a do not desist, cease and desist letter turning up on your doorstep, and yeah, that can be unfortunate.
Yep.
Actually, let me give you a real life example
I
of
would
that.
love to hear.
There was a local establishment here in Detroit, and the owner came to me at some time. I mean, not initially, but later on, they came to me and said, "Look, we've gotten this cease and desist letter from an establishment in Florida.
Hmm.
They're nothing like us. Basically, we're kind of your local, not hole in the wall, but we're like your local bar.
Hmm.
This place has, on the website, has pictures of Jay-Z and Beyonce in their VIP. No one would confuse us whatsoever. But they sent us a letter saying we can't use our name anymore. And they'd come to me after several letters, several communications going back and forth. In the end, what turned out is that there was a problem as far as the establishment here in Detroit hadn't necessarily done what they needed to do
Hmm.
in order to give themselves the right to the name. And as a result, they ended up spending money, new signs. I mean, the best we could negotiate essentially was a year to
Hmm.
get new signs, new menus, just like complete rebranding,
Hmm.
essentially scrubbing the internet of any reference to, themselves as under the prior name. It was actually fairly expensive. Now, it was they were they are a very well run business, which is why they were able to overcome that. But if you're not careful, you can find yourself in a position where you completely have to rebrand. You lose sort of all the goodwill that you might have built up associated with that identity. And there you go.
It's tough, I imagine for sure. When you're in that position as that restaurant, is there anything you can do or say as a business owner prior to starting your business to make sure that you don't infringe on someone else's trademark or do everything you can? I know, for example, there are databases out there, but I feel as though sometimes those databases, respectfully, aren't the most updated or don't have all the information that you might need sometimes. So, from a lawyer's perspective, what could someone do?
Well, so the if you're talking about a trademark, you can do a trademark search. United States Patent and Trademark Office maintains a database. That's the only database that counts.
Hmm.
You look in there. If the name or image or color, sound, smell, whatever it is that's indicating the source of goods that are being placed in interstate commerce. If it's in there, you might want to take a step back. Now,
Consider.
there's some qualifications, right? So when you're talking about every trademarks are in classes of goods and services, right? So if I wanted to open, let's say my name was Joe McDaniels, and I wanted to open up a restaurant called McDaniels with a big M as the sign, I probably wouldn't be able. I mean, I could do it, but I'm pretty sure McDonald's will come after me. But if I wanted to open up McDaniels, auto repair, McDonald's doesn't have a right to stop me from doing that. No one is going to confuse McDaniels auto repair with McDonald's hamburgers. Now, I might have trouble with the sub shop, sandwiches, maybe McDonald's is branching out, that kind of thing, right? So you do the search. If you're doing a search for just a word, you can probably do it yourself. I wouldn't hire a lawyer for that. I mean, you could, but if you're doing an image or it's a name that a lot of things come up, but you're not sure if they would necessarily stop you from using the name, then you bring in a lawyer.
Got it. Looking at it the other way around, say if McDonald's wanted to do something and they might just call it, if there was ever legal work that came up, they might just call it a coincidence. If they ever did something that might infringe on, say, a smaller company's copyright or patent, is that much difficult for the smaller party to deal with just because McDonald's can pay seemingly infinite legal fees?
No, for example, in a trademark case, it can get expensive, of course. You do have in any instance where you have one party with the disproportionate, where there's a lot of disparity in money, that can be an issue. But the laws are pretty clear, and big companies go after each other all the time. You don't always get the winner you expect. Perfect example I like to give. At one point, I believe it was Holiday Inn had a service called McCheckout, right? McDonald's was not happy with that. So because when they were deposing a member of Holiday Inn, they're like, well, why did you use that? And they go, well, we just wanted people to think of, it's quick, it's easy, it's fast, efficient. There is no natural association between Mick and quick, fast. That is an image that comes into your head because McDonald's has literally spent billions of dollars on advertising, right? They have created that association in their head. They're not going to let you trade on it freely. So they will go after you. But generally speaking, if you've done your homework ahead of time, that's not really something you have to worry about.
Okay, that's fair. I feel like I have to ask you, in the Pepsi case, the Pepsi Where's My Jet case, who do you think was in the right there? The Pepsi or the kid who wanted the jet?
There are things called fair use, right? So, hey, man, you always got to go with the little kid. I mean, come on.
I mean, look, it was a really smart thing to do. I think it's a famous case, it seems, in law schools for a reason, because I think today they would never do something like that. But I mean, they sent their stuff in. I mean, in the end, I think there was some, I might be wrong on this, so small disclaimer there, but I think there was some summary judgment in some district court in New York where kind of the judge kind of ruled in Pepsi's favor. But I think he had, prior to that, they offered him like a few $1 million to put the case away. So a really interesting case, for sure.
Well, you never want bad publicity in the course of. Oh, this is another important point. You never want bad publicity to vindicate your right. It's like the music companies early on when you had when music was actually protected digital rights management, right? Never a good idea to sue your customers in order to make your point. So
this looks bad.
There's that.
It's probably
a bad look.
Yeah, it's also probably a waste of resources on their end. I mean, they're probably these multi-hundred million, billion-dollar production companies. What are they going to sue someone who's just enjoying their music?
Right. Yeah. Well, slippery slope was their argument, right? It's like if we let one person do it or we let a few people do it, then suddenly nobody wants to pay for music. And then of course he said, "Oh, sure, we'll pay for music. We'll pay 99 cents a download or something." I mean, you know,
Interesting
the
point.
market evolves.
Definitely. I think there's also an interesting movement among a lot of creators too. When other, for example, creators mimic or make parodies of it, where they haven't gone after them legally because the way they say it, it's free marketing. I think Mr. Beast, for example, some famous YouTuber, told anyone, feel free to cut, paste, do whatever you want with my videos. Because he said from his point of view, one, it's not worth resource-wise going after people. And two, if someone else uses it to go viral, in hindsight, the original source is the one that's kind of going viral too. So food for thought there for sure.
Yeah, well, and also parody is actually an
Very.
exemption from most most copyright infringement claims, right? The entire idea behind copyright is in fact to advance science and the useful arts, and so parody it kind of falls into that,
Got it.
right?
So parody as you please, but please cautiously.
Yes, it's a good idea.
That's a fair point. You said early on when you were working in New York, you didn't kind of love the big law life, but eventually you transitioned it into trademark and IP. So, from the cases that you met, other than the cases that you mentioned before, are there any other ones that stand out for you that you really enjoyed working on and kind of reaffirmed your move to that part of the law?
Yeah, but I wouldn't really want to discuss.
Got it. All the
I'll discuss some clients.
Mhm.
I try to help people keep a
No worries.
low profile.
No, I get it too. I used to work in corporate America, so I totally understand. A lot of times they want to, I forget what it's called, but the documents are sealed or something. So always looking for high level. But if you can't talk about that, no worries on that whatsoever. Um,
Oh, I can give you here. I can give you an example.
mhm.
So there was someone who was a very he was an artist, very solid with what he did, and um, eventually got out of being an artist and a uh, became a preacher. In fact,
Interesting.
well, when he was an artist, he was also very much a businessman. So um, he had copyrighted and preserved the rights to all the music that he ever did. And frequently, as happens with hip hop, you would have uh, an artist come and say, "Hey, we would like to, sample this music. We'd like to use the beat. We'd like to use whatever." Eventually, he passed away, and at that point, the copyright goes to his estate. He actually ended up remarrying a woman who was much younger,
Mhm.
and so artists would come to them to get samples. And then there was a song that became incredibly popular, and no one bothered. They failed for whatever reason to get permission to use his music, but because the guy had passed away, the only person that, because it was a hip hop song and there was a much younger child, they were like, "Yo, I know that beat."
Mhm.
And so seeing them able to just like pull out, yeah, here's the original like vellum like notation, here's the copyright. I mean, we have everything locked down, and having the artists go, "My bad," and pay a very significant, sort of there's a lot of money involved in the transaction.
Mhm.
But the way that played out, helping somebody, you know, I mean, they came to me, they're like, "Look, I know this beat."
Mhm.
And people always say that, so and so jacked my beat. But no, for real, in this case, that's what happened.
Got it.
And so it's always very interesting to see how, music lives on and provides a steady stream of income for not only the artist, but for, their estate after they passed on.
Got it. So there's a really significant remedy involved there because of a legal matter and someone basically saying my bad when they probably, I don't want to speak about the person in the case, but when it's more than likely they probably had knowledge of that beat beforehand.
I have no idea.
Got it. No worries.
But yes.
Got it. That's a fair answer. Um, living in Detroit now, and kind of, it sounds like you grew up in Detroit, correct?
Hmm.
So did
I'm a
you always
native.
know you wanted to, after going to law school, after practicing in Chicago, New York, doing the big law thing, did you always know that you wanted to go back to Detroit and really practice and serve your community there?
So I would love to be able to give an answer
Hmm.
that provided inspiration and guidance to those who might be listening. But I have stumbled about in life like you would not believe. I I mean, some of the most important decisions I've made in my life have been very much spur of the moment.
Hmm.
And uh, so I was at the time I was living in New York, and I enjoyed what I was doing. And then I just saw um, a friend forwarded me essentially a job, posting. And I wasn't particularly looking. I looked at it and I was like, oh, that's so dope. And it was an opportunity to come back to Detroit.
Hmm.
And, I've got family here and teach at a law school in downtown Detroit and run a clinic. So it was very practical, hands-on teaching students basically how to do the things I do now.
Hmm.
Right. So, um, yeah, the opportunity appeared. I was getting tired of New York.
Hmm.
Um, I was like, yeah. So there wasn't a lot of thought that went into it, but I just got lucky. I loved how it turned out. I
Hmm.
loved the students. I referred a case to a student uh, literally yesterday,
Hmm.
uh, and it's just it was. I mean, what I do is fun.
Hmm.
Seeing other people learn to do it is amazing. Being able to do it in my hometown, even better.
Hmm.
But yeah, not a lot of planning. Is serendipity, luck, fate, however you want to call it.
Yep.
Don't.
Did
I
you?
am not a role model in that regard.
No, no worries. I appreciate the honesty there. Do you find that the work that you got a chance to do in Detroit was much more rewarding or kind of much more fulfilling than just the big law work you were doing in New York?
Oh yeah, without a doubt, without a doubt. I mean, when you're able to help, you know, literally the children of people you went to elementary school with,
Hmm.
right? When you get to help a business that is operating less than a mile from your childhood home,
Hmm.
right? I mean, that's amazing. That's fantastic. I feel really, I don't know, say blessed, lucky, whatever. But
That's
yeah, it's
great.
turned out really well.
Got it. That's awesome to hear. Another thing that you work on or that you've advocated for are kind of ethical complications that companies, or especially big tech companies, should consider as they keep on growing. So, from your eyes, how does a company, kind of as they advance technology, walk a fine line between staying ethical, not kind of going over their bounds to kind of do bad things when it comes to kind of advancing technology?
Uh, I mean, personally, I don't think the line is that fine,
Hmm.
right?
The fair
It's
answer.
who was it? Google used to have the motto, don't be bad or don't be evil or something like that.
Hmm.
Uh, I think most people start off thinking that if they had a choice between making a lot of money and and doing something bad and not making as much money and doing and being good, most people think that they would, they'd go this way and do the good thing.
Hmm.
But people reach that decision when it's hypothetical,
Hmm.
right? When the money is real, people have a very different attitude,
Hmm.
and I don't know if there's any sort of
Fine.
guiding principle that you could
Hmm.
rely on that's going to help you make the right decision every time. As long as you're a company that is owned by a small group of people, then the morals, the sense of morality and ethos of those individuals can shape how the company acts, right?
Hmm.
Once you become, for example, a privately traded company, I mean a publicly traded company, or you have angel investors, people that have given you, a lot of money and want to see a return on their investment, then suddenly you're really not in control anymore.
Hmm.
You don't have the same freedom to say, I'm going to forego the possibility of, profit because it conflicts with my morals. I mean, in some instances, you don't even have a legal right to do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
right? So, um, yeah, you don't even have a legal right to do that anymore. So, it becomes a difficult uh,
Road to walk down for sure.
decision,
Got
right?
it. I think a lot of times too, just operating in bad faith, if that's the right way to phrase it, and kind of chasing money over ethics. I feel like as though maybe this doesn't happen all the time, but the truth eventually always seems to come out. So I think what they could do is, sacrifice, their ethics or, the good of society in the short run. But then when stuff comes out in the long run, I think no amount of money will be able to personally remedy for themselves kind of how society feels about them and how people look at them for sure. So it's a fine line to walk down, definitely.
You're an optimist
Yeah.
that the truth always out. Yeah, it may, but frequently by the time that happens, the people who actually profited are dead,
Mm.
having lived a happy, fulfilled, and wealthy life.
Yeah,
So
for sure. Do
I
you think
wish.
do you think that on that note, do you think that a lot of times, when a lot of these big tech companies grow, since we're in the digital age, if they, violate that, gray or really thin boundary, we'll call it that, do you think a lot of times they do it so intentionally or they do it just because of kind of common negligence? Or is that also really tough, unfair to assign one of those to the general consensus?
Yeah, it's hard to assign that kind of motivation to a large company,
Hmm.
right? I mean, yes, when bad things happen, it's typically because an individual somewhere did a bad thing,
Hmm.
right? But that doesn't mean everybody who was in the company was on board with that. Uh, they're motiv they're motivated by profit.
Hmm.
And even nonprofits are motivated by the need to generate revenue in order to continue doing the good work they do,
Hmm.
right? It's um, I don't like. Let's put it this way: I judge companies on what they do, and
Hmm.
in many instances, what they do is has very negative consequences for either certain individuals or certain communities or society
Hmm.
as a whole, right? That doesn't mean everybody that works at the company is a bad person,
Yeah. That
right?
was a lawyer change right there in the document.
Think about this. There's a
Hmm.
lot of companies that artificial intelligence is a perfect example,
Hmm.
right? It is a technology that has the potential to change every society for the better,
Hmm.
right? It also has the potential to create a dystopian nightmare
Hmm.
in, you know, in the same communities. So, and I think a lot of the people who created the technology, who have, sort of created and advanced the technology, had those good things in mind.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, when you see it get implemented and you have to deal with things like, inherent biases that work their way into the software, or you have to deal with the fact that, AI hallucinates, which is like
Scary
frightening,
to think about. Yeah.
or or it's being incorporated into, for example, surveillance that's used to, continually oppress communities that are already dealing with a lot of issues, right? There's good and bad in all of it, and unfortunately, there aren't sort of the dividing, the clear divisions and the guiding principles that work all the time that we wish there were.
Got it. So it's you can only assume you're practicing in good faith, and then no, you might make mistakes sometimes. But if what a company does is at least in line with what can add value or benefit society, then typically they'll be on the right path. It sounds like.
Well, that's what you hope anyway.
Got it. No, that's also a fair point. I think also a big fear with the rise in AI, while it is a remarkable tool and if used in the right ways, can definitely streamline, I think, societal development in a lot of ways. But I do think also there's this big fear of misinformation. I think there was, I forget if it was a few months ago or a few weeks ago, but someone made a picture of, a plane crashing into a big government building, and like the photo went viral. I think had 60 million or so hits on Twitter. Sorry, X. I don't
Mhm.
want any problems with
Yeah.
Elon Musk. But I think stuff like that is really fearsome for sure when there's the spread of misinformation. Because I think if you're using it to kind of do something honestly, it's great. But if you're using it to kind of spread misinformation or spread lies, I think that could have some really kind of negative externalities for society for sure.
Yeah. I'm assuming you're a real person, right? For all I know, you could
Yeah,
be.
no, I'm a real person. Yeah, I'm saving as I grow the podcast, we'll hopefully get a bit of a better camera. But I can confirm too, I'm not AI. I'm a real person. I'm all good. Actually, it's funny you said that because I saw a buddy at the gym the other day, and he told me, "Hey, I saw you interview this one person. Their camera was great, but you kind of looked AI." So that was you brought that up. But no, Eric, I assure you, I'm a real individual. You can search me up after. I'm as plain as they come. So no worries on that end. So we'll see where kind of AI implications go in the future. But on another note, working as a lawyer, I'm sure you've read your fair amount of books in your life. Do you have a favorite book that you've read in the past, and why so?
Actually, yeah, my favorite book of all time. Well, not of all time, but one of my definitely favorite books. Uh, it's by Richard K. Morgan. It's called Altered Carbon, and there's a Netflix series on it that sucks. It has nothing to do with the book whatsoever, but it's an incredible book. I love it. It has a pretty good. It does a pretty good job of projecting how some scientific developments may play out in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, there's a book called 13 by the same artist,
Mm-hmm.
same author. That's among my favorite books. I'm a sci-fi guy.
Got it. Sci-fi is good. Sci-fi is interesting. I think. We'll see how long we all live if we see any of that kind of stuff in the future. But always cool to see with as society advances hypothetically what things could look like. Hopefully for the better. Uh,
Yeah.
if you could have dinner with anyone in history, dead or alive, who would it be?
Dinner with anybody who's ever lived in history. Probably Napoleon.
Mm-hmm. I think someone said that before in another show too. I forget exactly who, but that's the second Napoleon I think I've gotten so far.
There's absolutely no reason he should have accomplished as much as he did. I'm just like, I would want to ask, yeah. So how did you get everyone to follow your orders?
Mm-hmm.
He has to have been the best like motivator in the history of humankind. Really organized. I mean, yeah, I definitely want to get some management tips from Napoleon.
Do you think it might have been easier back then with the lack of technology? Since at that time, I don't want to say all someone really had to do, but if someone could express their opinion confidently, whether it was good or bad, unfortunately, hopefully good, that they were able to kind of gain a following back then.
And that's different from now. How?
Because I think now maybe since they're I don't know.
I
Look,
mean,
this is an outside opinion. I'm definitely no expert. That's my little disclaimer there. But I think right now there's much more competition for attention, especially through the digital age with things like influencers and people seemingly doing everything to build the social following. I think there's actually companies that people can buy fake followers from, something like that. In short, I
right.
think there's much more competition now than there was in the pre-digital age. So do you think? Sure, it wasn't easy, but do you think it was maybe easier back then to gain influence than it is today?
Well, so there's a bit of a difference, right? You think about it. There's a lot of competition to get eyeballs and to get likes,
Mm-hmm.
right? But there's actually not a lot of competition to get people to act and
Mm-hmm.
to actually
Do
do
something.
things,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, doesn't matter how many followers you have if you don't motivate. If all you're doing is motivating them to buy records, no big deal. Uh, you know, but if Taylor Swift decides, as she has from time to time, to motivate them to vote,
Mm-hmm.
then
That's something else.
completely you entered into completely different level of influence. So I think the number of people who are actually vying for influence in ways that impact society, I don't think it's really any greater than it's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a lot more people uh, vying for your attention for
Mm-hmm.
30 seconds, which is
Got it.
completely different.
So the big thing is the ability to galvanize people into action, whether it be hundreds of or thousands of years ago and today.
Right.
Got it. Eric, if your life story was to be made in a movie, who would you want to play? Who would you want to play you as an actor?
Oh, I know who, but I can't remember his name right now. Uh, he was did you ever see The Best Man? The movie The
Um,
Best Man.
what year did it come out?
Oh, probably before you were born.
Okay,
But then they've made a couple of more since then. He used to have a TV show. You know what? I'm literally going to Google this guy because
no worries.
he is the answer to that question.
Sure,
His name is Terrence Howard.
Terrence Howard. Okay,
Yes. Apparently he's kind of insane as a sort of like a real person. Well, not apparently, but that seems
no
to
worries.
be sort of what the
Mhm.
social media says, is that he's a little bit quirky, but he's a hell of a good actor and he's real smooth. And I would
Mhm.
like to, anybody plays the guitar behind his head, just sort of, you know, that's
Exactly.
cool.
I feel that. What would you say brings you the most happiness in life?
My family. Um, I have 3 kids. They are the coolest people I know.
Mm.
And I just got a text from my daughter, Justice. I told her to drive carefully. And she says, I love you. I will. She's 26 and she's turned into a person who I really like.
Mm-hmm.
My 24-year-old daughter is getting married next year.
Cool.
Uh, my son is a police officer in New Jersey. I'm proud of all my kids. They're funny. They're
Mm-hmm.
smart. They're kind. So,
Family.
I mean, hanging out with them is fun. I'm very lucky in that regard. I'm blessed.
We love wholesomeness, and definitely congratulations to your daughter on her marriage, and hopefully for her and all the other kids, just happy and fulfilling lives ahead. But on that note, Eric, you've had a really cool life story. Kind of, you live the high big law life, but always return to your home roots and have built a great firm and a great family there, and a great life there. Is there anything else you want to share, whether it's life advice, relationship advice, business advice, law advice? Final word is yours, Eric.
Only advice I give people is don't be afraid to screw up.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that's important. Be fearless about it. Don't. I've seen so many people with wonderful ideas be held back by the fear of failure, and we all fail. Not everything goes as planned. That doesn't mean that it isn't going to work out.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, be fearless is all I got to say. Oh,
Uh,
and be a good person. We got enough crappy people in the world already.
good people and fearless. That sounds like a great way to live, and a great final word. Eric, thanks so much for taking the time.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Eric Williams. If you enjoyed the episode, rate the show on Spotify, drop a comment on YouTube, and subscribe.